Hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Devraj, this is Mysticism and the Body. And today we're going to continue our journey. I'm going to continue my journey with the Fama Fraternitatis. And actually I'm going to very slightly jump ship. Might sound a bit disturbing, but I managed to get hold of a copy for free because I don't really like paying for stuff like this very much if I can possibly avoid it. Of this book from 2016, the 400th anniversary of the publication of the Rosicrucian manifestos, done to celebrate that by Jocelyn Godwin, Christopher Mackintosh and his wife, Donate Mackintosh, who's German speaking, and remember the manifestos were originally written in German, and they did a new translation into English of all three manifestos, which is super cool. The original translation, which we've been looking at, this one here, was attributed to Thomas Vaughan, though he, I believe, said, actually, I didn't write it. Someone gave it to me. Here's a copy of the Fama in English, mate. Have a look at it. However, I don't quite know how it went down, this giving. But, that's the copy we've got. And it's awesome, this English translation, I think. But there are, particularly early on, one or two bits that really are a bit unclear. And of course, that's a little bit tricky when you're dealing with what is essentially an allegorical tale, because the fact that it's a bit unclear and that you have to invest some time and some mental energy, some effort into working it out is natural. Nevertheless, that it's as clear as possible from the original German is good. So I'm going to jump ship a little bit. It's not going to really affect what we've done so far, and now use this version from Godwin and the Mackintoshes. So let's just recap briefly where we got to. First paragraph, all to do with, the fact that we don't really get nature, in the sense that ideally we want to be reading the Liber Mundi, the book of the world. And that means you really understand nature and the environment that you've got on a very deep level. And it's like you're seeing the signs. If you remember old movies about, Native Americans tracking people, reading the signs in the earth, it's a little bit like that as I see it. That the world around you is always pointing you in a certain direction. Some would say, we're immersed in this actually, learning environment, initiatic learning environment. And I think that's broadly true. It's just that we've been trying very much to understand it from this egoic perspective. And so doing reinforces the egoic perspective, self, this individual self and the world out there. And so that's been problematic. And that's incidentally a big part of the early sections of the Fama pointing at this. So, we start off with, he hath not only revealed half of the unknown and hidden world and laid before us many wondrous and hitherto never experienced works and creations of nature, but has also caused certain highly illuminated minds to come forth, who might partially renew the arts, which have become debased and imperfect, so that finally man might understand his true nobility and splendour. We start identifying the kind of issue straight away, and then we go into a theme which will dominate the first part of the Fama, that of the fact that although the German, but really it means North European and by extension later American, that the brain of these guys has developed this capacity for abstract thought, and this will create the Enlightenment and all of this. It's also, what's happened with this abstract thought is that it's just reinforced these intellectual sense of individuality. And then what they're not doing is really supporting each other, sharing knowledge in an open way, but more just kind of, this is me trying to get ahead, trying to get up the primate status hierarchy of academia or whatever with my knowledge. The mind is not so open. And this is a big problem that the Fama is really trying to attack in this manifesto. Rather, every faction among them opposes every other. They cling to old teachings, blah, 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 esteeming the Pope, Aristotle, Galen, blah, blah, blah. And it ends by sort of saying, this is the work of the devil, essentially. This is the work of the devil. He keeps people in this kind of individualistic, personal ambition kind of focus, and doesn't allow them to see who they really are, doesn't allow them to look behind themselves, so to speak. And then with the third paragraph, we start in with the Father Frater C.R.C., a German, the head and founder of our fraternity. And it talks about, while still in the bloom of youth, by his own fervent plea, he got assigned to a certain brother PAL. So that is, what that's saying is, he desired to do something different. Here he is, and basically, he's a young man, and what is he going to do? Is he just going to follow the track laid out for him by his culture, what his family wants, get a nice job with his uncle or whatever, and marry a woman in the street next door? Is that going to be his life? Or is he going to go for some kind of adventure, some kind of spiritual adventure? And, there is somewhere inside of him this heartfelt, fervent plea. This idea of a fervent plea is important, and he gets assigned to a certain brother PAL, and PAL, as we've seen, represents Aleph, which is the Fool key. It's the basic spiritual impulse. So essentially, while still a young guy, he's got this spiritual impulse that's come into him that wants to take him out. He wants more than just the life that's being laid out for him around him. And they want to travel together, him and the spiritual impulse, to Jerusalem, the Holy Sepulchre. And Jerusalem, is more like when you first get into spirituality, you want peace. You want peace from your kind of, tortuous mind, and that's often what leads people, if they try to learn meditation because they want peace, So they start traveling towards Jerusalem from Germany, but the brother dies in Cyprus, which, as we've seen, Cyprus is to do with Venus, it's to do with the throat center, fifth chakra. So this spiritual impulse has died, but it's died opening something in the throat center. And yet, the brother CR did not turn back, but sailed on and went to Damascus, intending to go to the place of peace, Jerusalem. So Damascus is like the place of work. However, sickness detained him in Damascus, where he won favour among the Turks. We'll look back at that line in a little while. It's a strange kind of a line. And during his stay in Damascus, he heard by chance about the wise men of Damcar in Arabia and the great wonders they performed. So this is really a central line here. This is all a spiritual metaphor. It's a metaphor for a spiritual journey. So our brother CR, he had his spiritual impulse, which took him away from the family and the kind of track that he was on in life. The spiritual impulse has gone now, but it's opened his throat center. And when the throat center opens, you also get access to inner hearing. And so this is, in a spiritual experience, this is rather like the holy guardian angel, if you're familiar with the Crowley work or with Golden Dawn work, this kind of thing. The idea that there's a kind of personal guardian angel who can guide you, because we do need guidance. We do need guidance. We live in a world dominated by race impulses, by family stuff, by our culture's needs for us, what wants us to do stuff or fight for it or work for it or whatever. So we do need guidance to get anywhere. This is pretty much central. But what's happened is he's got this inner hearing has come, and he's heard about the wise men of Damcar in Arabia. So these are like some kind of spiritual masters who are either in the body but communicating with him through some kind of strange channel, or they're perhaps living in some kind of astral realm kind of concept. And great wonders, and how nature was an open book to them. So they know how to read the book of nature. They know how to read the Liber Mundi. So he's in Damascus. Spiritual impulse has died, but now his inner hearing has come on. And this inner hearing has inspired his high and noble mind. The highest part of his mind has got turned on. And so now he's not really so interested in the place of peace, Jerusalem, but he wants to go to Damcar. Now, Damcar is not a real physical location. In Hebrew, dam is blood and car is lamb. So it means blood of a lamb. It's to do with sacrifice, to do with initiation, essentially. Being unable to restrain his eagerness, so his libidinal vitality is coming up. This is also to do with winning favour among the Turks. This is probably a similar concept, that the Turks are seen as this libidinally vital race. Who they are. Living in Turkey, I can assure you that's true. And so his libidinal energy is coming up, even though his body apparently is a bit sick or something like that. It doesn't entirely make sense. It's obviously allegorical of something that I don't totally get. But his libidinal vitality is very high. So he persuaded some of the Arabian masters, these masters in Arabia, the land of sterility, in return for a sum of money to convey him to Damkar, to initiate him, basically. And the idea of a sum of money is more like some work that you have to do, maybe fasting or, following a special sleeping routine, sexual continence, abstaining from all sorts of stuff, maybe prayer, this kind of thing that's associated with getting a phase of blocking off the back doors and compelling some kind of energetic experience, kundalini experience. So he's arrived in Damkar at the allegorical age of 16, which, if you're familiar with tarot, that's the key for the tower struck by lightning, which is a classic old awakening metaphor, kundalini awakening. There the wise received him, as he avers, not as a stranger, but as someone who they long expected, calling him by his name. And this astonishes him. So this, like I explored last week, this is really just to do with the fact that, it's like the body, the ego that we have, this sense of individual personality, it's like a kind of squatter. It's got like a kind of squatter in our brain. And the real self is more like, we are part of this vast interconnected field. But for a while, it's like nature, or like spirit is playing a tune for us. But for a while, our body's an instrument. But for a while, it seems like we're just an individual. So that's a metaphor there where the wise men know this person because he's part of them. As we all are, mentioning unknown facts about his monastery, so they know this guy. They know this guy. There he learned the Arabic language better, so that the following year he was able to translate into good Latin the Liber M, which he then carried with him. So again, learning how to read the book of nature. Adhan has started up in the background. We'll get to religion in a moment, I think. It was from here that he took physics, mathematics, again here with this sentence here, which ought to have been joyfully received by the world if only there was more love and less resentment. Again, going back to the bitchiness of the kind of North European intellectual mind. So he's been in Damkar 3 years. After 3 years, he went on his way again, well enlightened, departing by ship from the Arabian Peninsula and proceeding to Egypt. So he's gone from the Arabian Peninsula, presumably the Sinai desert, ever for the Jews also a major place of kind of initiation, with Moses back in the days of the Torah, book of Exodus and stuff, proceeding across the river to Egypt. But he remained for only a short time, though long enough to gain better knowledge of its flora and fauna. So this short sentence, Dr. Case in his interpretation, we've been looking at this for true and invisible Rosicrucian order, excellent interpretation of the Fama Fraternitatis in there. But Egypt, Musa in Hebrew or Arabic, is forever, it's a place associated in spiritual metaphors with the dark forces of the unconscious, the underworld, animal magnetism, sexual energy, libidinal vitality. This idea of all sorts of very primitive, energized creatures in a kind of orgiastic state with each other. Which when even for us thinking individuals, when nighttime comes on, that kind of starts to dominate our brain a little bit. This dark desire nature, this darkly splendid realm, as they call it. So that's what Egypt is about, this place of these dark energies inside the human body, which are, though we repress them, they still kind of come up and intrigue us. So he's gone down into this realm, but only for a short time, long enough to get a better understanding of what's going on down there. And then from Egypt, he sailed along the whole length of the Mediterranean Sea to Fez. So Fez is a very old big city in Morocco, in the north of Morocco. I used to go there in my 20s. It's got biggest Medina in the world, and that's the old town, Fez el-Bali. And then it's also a kind of metaphor for a centre of great learning, which it was about 1,000 years ago. Whither he'd been directed by the Arabians. So the Arabians are these, the secret masters who are teaching him, initiating him, and they've sent him off to this area of Fez. And it puts us to shame that wise men so far remote from each other should not only be of one mind, rejecting all contentious writings, but also be so willing and ready to reveal their secrets to others in trust and openness. So again, it's coming back to this same concept that the Germans, who are really just representing the North European intellectuals, You know, they're very caught up in this identified mind. They're very intellectual, and they've got these brilliant thoughts and ideas and insights, but they can't really share them with each other. They keep them to themselves. You know, this is my thoughts, this is my insight. You know, and they try to aggrandize themselves. So we continue along. I think that's where we got to last time. Every year, the Arabians and Africans send representatives to meet with each other, to question one another concerning their arts, and to ascertain whether there have been any new and improved inventions, or whether their existing systems of knowledge have been weakened by experience. In this way, every year something is brought to light for the improvement of mathematics, physics and magic, in which the inhabitants of Fez excel. So, you know, what's this about? So it's talking about the Arabians and the Africans. We've just had the Turks earlier. Now, these people are kind of like, I think what it's really referring to is the idea of slightly more primitive people in an intellectual sense, but people who nevertheless, that the insights and the kind of shamanic and mystical insights that they have, they share them and they work together. You know, prior to the kind of European Enlightenment, prior to the Middle Ages as well, you know, when the West was in the Dark Ages, 1,000 years ago, of course, the Arabs, the Moors, you know, had conquered all of North Africa and a big chunk of southern Europe. And then you look at many of the original alchemy books and stuff like that, a lot of them were just translated into Latin from Arabic. So whereas nowadays, you know, Westerners are rather somewhat, you know, disparaging towards people from Africa or the MENA lands, you know, Middle East, North Africa, back in the day, these guys were really dominant as not just so much as super intellectual, but as mystics, as really investigating and understanding the world. And they were much more open-hearted and working together. That's what it's saying. Then to continue, since in Germany at this time there is no lack of scholars, magi, Kabbalists, physicians and philosophers, either they should be better disposed to each other, or if a majority do not want that, then each must eat up the whole meadow alone. So once again, we're back with the same thing. You know, this new wave of like superfrontal lobe abstract thinking has come along. This is the 17th century. But, you know, what it's done also, as well as giving people these amazing insights, it's locked them up in their mind, in the idea of an individual mind. So once again, the farmer's banging on about the same concept. Let's continue, next paragraph. At Fez, he made the acquaintance of the elementary inhabitants, as he commonly called them, who revealed to him much of what they knew, just as we Germans could do among ourselves if we had sufficient unity and a passionate and earnest desire to search. So what I think this is talking about, you know, what Dr. Case in the True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order, by the way, if you look at this word, you know, or this title, true, T and A, invisible, you can leave out because it's invisible. Rosicrucian R and order O, it's tarot. It's spelling out tarot there in its own little way. That gives a big clue what this is all about. But what he talks about with the elementary inhabitants, the idea of the four elements and of the four elementals that go along with them. So you've got fire, air, water and earth. And then you've got the kind of salamanders, the undines, the sylphs and the gnomes, I think. So, you know, I don't wish to be disparaging. You know, I haven't super studied this stuff and probably need to a bit more. But essentially what's happened is that he's learned to kind of investigate the inorganic kingdom, essentially. What's been going on in his brief time in Egypt is that he's gone into the darkly splendid world of this kind of deep, dark animal unconscious. And in Fez, he's getting to know the elementals. And once again, banging on about how the Germans could do this themselves, but they're not unified and they don't have this earnest desire to search. Let's continue along. Of these people of Fez, he often said that their major was not altogether pure and that their Kabbalah was tainted by their religion. So what does this mean? What it's really saying, I think, is that, you know, the problem for being a mystic back in the day, and to a degree even now, is that you can't really go against God. You know, if you study Kabbalah at all, either the Western or the kind of Jewish version, the rabbinic Kabbalah, you know, it's based around the 10 Sephirot. That's like one core concept. And one of the things that comes out of that is that, you know, there is no God. There is no God. You know, there's Ein Sof, this kind of completely empty creative field of the unmanifest, but there's no God there kind of telling people what to do. Now, but of course, if you were a Kabbalist back in the day in 15th century Spain or whatever, you can't go around saying there's no God, because the Inquisition are going to have you on a fire pretty damn quick. So I think what we're looking at here, and it would have been the same in Islam as well, I think you would have had to be pretty careful about saying, even though Allah, Allah, is God, no God, essentially, it's a kind of self-negating, quite clever little phrase. But even so, you probably couldn't go round as a kind of mystic in the Mena lands in the 9th century, proclaiming to people that there was no Allah. You probably would have ended up in the Muslim equivalent of a burning, basically. So that their major is not altogether pure and their Kabbalah is tainted by their religion. I think that's what it's talking about. The need of mysticism in that era to conform also to religious orthodoxy. Nevertheless, he knew how to make good use of the same, and thereby found an even better foundation for his own belief, a foundation which is in exact harmony with the whole world, and whose impress is wonderfully evident in all periods of time. So what we're looking at here, is this idea that everything is one, that it's a kind of non-dual world that we exist, and the life is flowing through us as a vessel, as an instrument. And because of this, so everything is in a sense of harmony. It's in a sense of harmony, and this is this idea of above and below, a spiritual world and a material world. Just continue. It goes along on the same thread. Thence arises the recognition of the beautiful unity whereby, just as every seed contains the whole tree and its fruit, so likewise the whole world is contained in miniature in every human being, with his religion, politics, health, bodily parts, natural traits, speech, work and words, all of which partake of the same tune and melody as God, heaven and earth. So, just reinforcing what I just said, that this kind of spiritual essence somewhere or whatever is playing a tune through us. We're his instruments, but for a period of time, we believe that we're separate individuals. Let's continue. Everything to the contrary would be error, falsehood, and of the devil, who is the first, middle, and last cause of worldly strife, blindness, and darkness. So this is, it's taking a little bit of a position. It's saying that this identified mind, which has come around by the extreme sort of frontal lobe development that's happened to the North Europeans, is really the work of the devil. It's binding you. If you look at key 15 from the tarot, you see this figure of Baphomet in the negative. He's holding one arm up with fingers like this, to indicate that everything is dualistic. He's kind of teaching you it's all material and it's dualistic, and his lower hand holds a torch from which only a tiny bit of light shines. And he's got a couple of kind of preening humans attached to the stone that sits underneath him. So here what they're saying is, you can make, this falsehood and error and intellectual mind into a very complex thing, but it's easier just to say it's the work of the devil, and it's a work essentially of identification. That's what it's saying. It's because you're getting identified with the way that you're using your mind. You're reinforcing constantly this concept of individuality and of selfhood, of personal selfhood. So if one were to examine each and every person on the globe, one would find that what is good and true is always at one with itself, whilst its opposite is marked by 1,000 aberrant opinions. So it's saying that, once you start to recognize on an actual experiential level the unity behind life and the unity behind this kind of guest, that's living inside your mind, the self, the so-called self, then you see that there's an immense harmony in the world. And that's at odds with the way that everyone is kind of, in certain countries just fighting each other about opinions all the time. So I think, after this, then Frater R.C. is going to leave Fez and travel off to Spain, and we can pick that up in the next episode. I think I've covered enough here. So, this is all about the spiritual journey of this guy, and it's about the spiritual journey we can each go on. The heartfelt desire for something different, leading to this spiritual impulse which gives you energy to move, to get up, out, away from, the environment that you're in, to not just go on the track that your parents went on. And this kind of cloistering that it talked about earlier, secluding yourself off, something opening the throat and the inner hearing centers so that you can tune into a kind of, intuitive wisdom, the magnet of the wise, the holy guardian angel, whatever, that can guide you to a place where you can actually get initiated, where you can undergo a process by which you have maybe some kundalini experience or something permanently changes in your consciousness so that you recognize the underlying unity of the world. Then you're going into this darkly splendid realm to get a grasp of what's going on down there, but you're not staying too long in case you get kind of hooked into this kind of orgiastic, underworld of energy and desire. And instead you're going to learn about the power of the inorganic kingdoms. That they're actually resolved into elements instead of this kind of, the very kind of materialist scientific concept, and governed by elementals. So that's how far his journey's been so far. And next off, he's going to go to Spain, which we'll pick up in the next episode. So thanks very much for tuning in. My name's Devraj Sandberg. If you want to know what else I'm up to, just put that name into Google, because it's such a weird name. You won't find many others of them around, and you'll find out all the stuff I'm up to pretty easy. And I'll see you again shortly for some more mysticism in the body, and we'll continue our journey with the Fama. Thank you.